This country is the least visited in the world. Unfortunately, the people who live there are suffering from a high prevalence of physical illnesses, such as diabetes, heart conditions, and obesity. Since the early 1900s, at least 80% of its original vegetation has been lost. In 1980, it was considered the world's wealthiest nation, however. Business Dutch listed it as one of the 5 poorest countries in 2017. During World War II, it suffered significant damage from the Axis, German, Japanese, and Allied forces. In the years following its independence in 1968, this island had the highest GDP per capita in the world, thanks to its abundant phosphate deposits. However, due to greed, colonial mismanagement, and gross incompetence, the island, once known as Pleasant Island, is now on the brink of collapse. As of 2021, the island's public debt averaged 79.6% of GDP in the past decade, but it has now reduced to 24.8%. By the turn of the millennium, the island had turned into an environmental wasteland, and declining phosphate prices and the government's financial mismanagement had led to virtual bankruptcy. This is the story of Nauru, the country that ate itself. The 25 square kilometers of land encompassing it has been devastated by phosphate mining, which once made it the second wealthiest people per capita on Earth. Today, these people are ill, poor, and dependent on Australia's Immigration Detention Centre for financial support, but they were once among the wealthiest individuals on the planet. Their life story could have been significantly different if they had taken advantage of their island's natural resources. In 1798, Europeans discovered Nauru when a British whaling ship stumbled upon it. Before this discovery, Nauru's society had been organized around the collective decision-making of 12 clans or tribes. The captain of the hunter, John Fear, was fond of Nauru and its people, so he named it Pleasant Island. Nauru experienced relative peace until 1886, when the British Empire transferred control of the island to Germany. The German forces arrived 2 years later. They arrested the chiefs of each tribe and confiscated all of the island's weapons. The German flag was raised, and the island was renamed, marking the beginning of a 30-year rule over Nauru by the German Empire. Throughout the 19th century, Nauru had frequent encounters with Western nations. European whaling ships started trading with Nauru around 1830, exchanging guns and alcohol for food with the island's inhabitants. By 1870s, guns were in homes across the island, and Nauruans were smoking and drinking heavily, incredibly sour toddy made by fermenting coconut flowers. After a chief was shot and killed during a drunken quarrel, Nauru began to spiral into violence. Retaliations were swift and deadly. However, the introduction of guns and alcohol to the island almost destroyed it, leading to a brutal 10-year civil war in 1878 that caused nearly 50% of Nauru's population to die. After the war ended, alcohol was banned, and many guns were taken away. Sailing to Nauru in 1901, geologist Albert Ellis found that 80% of the island, the raised central plateau Nauruans call topside, was rich in phosphate of lime. The Pacific Islands Company was renamed the Pacific Phosphate Company, and in 1905, a deal was made with Germany to mine Nauru. A year later, the first boatload of Nauruan phosphate would sink in a storm off Australia. But this setback did little to deter miners, and over the next decade, Nauru would export hundreds of thousands of tons of phosphate. By 1906, the Pacific Phosphate Company had struck a deal with Germany that allowed them full use of the island's phosphate reserves, a practice that likely continued until the island's resources were exhausted. But then came the First World War. In 1914, after the outbreak of World War I, Nauru was captured by Australian troops. When the war ended, Nauru was given in trust to Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. These 3 governments created the British Phosphate Commission, which took over the rights to phosphate mining. During World War II, Nauru was subject to significant damage from Axis, German, Japanese, and Allied forces. On the 6th and 7th of December 1940, the Nazi German auxiliary cruisers Orion and Comet sank 4 merchant ships. The next day, Comet shelled Nauru's phosphate mining areas, oil storage depots, and the shiploading cantilever. The attacks seriously disrupted phosphate supplies to Australia and New Zealand, mainly used for munition and fertilizer. Japanese troops occupied Nauru on 26 August 1942 and executed 7 Europeans. the occupying forces badly treated the native Nauruans. On one occasion, 39 people with leprosy were reputedly loaded onto boats, which were towed out to sea and sunk. The Japanese troops built 2 airfields on Nauru, which were bombed for the first time on the 25th of March, 1943, preventing food supplies from being flown to Nauru. During World War II, in 1943, the Japanese deported 1,200 Nauruans to work as laborers in the Chuuk Islands. Unfortunately, 500 of them died from starvation or bombing. By the end of the war, in 1945, fewer than 600 Nauruans remained on the island, and 25% of the Nauruan population had died. After the war, the United Nations placed Nauru under a trusteeship of Australia, Britain, and New Zealand, with Australia administering the island. Finally, in 1968, Nauru became the world's smallest independent republic. Nauru became self-governing on January 1966, and, following a 2-year constitutional convention, became independent in 1968, led by founding President Hammer Darabert. In 1967, the people of Nauru bought the assets of the British Phosphate Commission, and in June 1970, control was passed to the locally owned Nauru Phosphate Corporation. Income from the exploitation of phosphate gave Nauruans one of the highest living standards in the Pacific. Nauru prospered during this period. By 1980, Nauru had become the wealthiest nation on the planet per capita, a monumental achievement for such a tiny, remote island. Rolling in riches, the locals abandoned their traditional lifestyles and turned to unhealthy food and alcohol. It wasn't long before a health crisis hit, and hard. Life expectancy plunged to just 50, while rates of diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illnesses skyrocketed along with their waistlines. In 2007, 94% of its residents were identified by the World Health Organization as overweight and 71% as obese, the highest rate in the world. Trying to diversify the economy before phosphate supplies ran out, Nauru turned to offshore banking, licensing around 400 foreign banks by the early 1990s. Nauru is still searching for a place in the world economy. Since 2006, it has upgraded mining equipment and refurbished mining infrastructure to dig out harder-to-reach phosphate. But its phosphate industry, mining around 45,000 metric tons a year, produces something different from the past. Below the sprinkling of primary surface phosphate still left on topside, Nauru does have secondary phosphate reserves, perhaps as much as 20 million metric tons. Plans are underway to mine this last remaining phosphate. But no one sees this as a long-term solution for its economic troubles. Since 1907, the island's economy has depended mainly on exporting the phosphate mined from the island. However, the phosphate reserves have been depleted due to continuous mining activities, resulting in severe environmental damage to the island. Consequently, the trust established to manage the island's wealth has significantly decreased in value. Droughts and storms are becoming more severe, and the rising seas are causing erosion along the coastline. One day, the only thing left may be topside, which will serve as a reminder of the consequences of greed and the irony of the name given to Nauruan land by Captain Fear and his Pleasant Island. We hope you enjoyed the video, and we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more informative and exciting content. Thank you.